The smell of dust and old wood always filled me with a strange comfort. Flea markets weren't just a weekend pastime for me. They were a ritual. There was something deeply soothing about wandering through aisles of forgotten treasures, each item carrying a history I'd never know but could imagine. I like to think of myself as a treasure hunter, though my treasures were never valuable in the traditional sense. An embroidered handkerchief, a tarnished locket, or a set of mismatched porcelain teacups. On that particular Saturday, the market was bustling. It was one of the larger ones, sprawling across a wide parking lot and creeping into the grassy field beyond. Vendors shouted over the chatter of buyers, and the air carried the mingling scents of grilled hot dogs and aging leather. I moved from stall to stall, running my fingers over stacks of faded books, admiring vintage jewelry displays, and flipping through racks of secondhand clothing. Most of the vendors knew me by now, and I enjoyed the familiarity of it all. The warm nods and occasional shared laughs made me feel like I belonged. But as I turned a corner toward a quieter section of the market, I noticed a stall I hadn't seen before. It was tucked under a large, sagging canopy. Unlike the other vibrant displays, this one seemed subdued. No flashy signs, no eager calls to passing customers. It almost felt forgotten. The moment I stepped closer, my eyes locked onto the mirror. It was propped up against an old wooden crate, surrounded by odds and ends that I barely registered. The mirror wasn't particularly large, maybe 3 feet tall and framed in dark, ornately carved wood. The carvings were intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to ripple like water if I looked too long. Despite its age, the glass was flawless, untouched by the fogging or scratches you'd expect from something that looked this ancient. I wasn't looking for a mirror. I wasn't even sure I wanted one, yet I couldn't tear my eyes away. It wasn't just beautiful, it felt magnetic. Draws you in, doesn't it? I startled, my focus breaking as the stall's vendor appeared. She was an older woman, her face weathered but kind, with sharp, almost bird-like eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She wore a shawl draped loosely over her shoulders, its fringe swaying as she gestured toward the mirror. "It's gorgeous," I said, hesitating, "but I don't think I need a mirror right now." Her lips curled into a knowing smile. Need doesn't always matter. Sometimes things find you, not the other way around. I laughed nervously, feeling foolish. I'm sure it'll find the right owner. I just don't have the space for it. She studied me for a moment, her sharp gaze softening. "Take it," she said abruptly. I blinked. "Take it? Yes. It's yours now." Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. I hesitated, caught off guard by her tone. "I can't just take it. How much do you want for it?" She shook her head and stepped closer. "No money. Just take it. You're doing me a favor." I felt a flicker of unease. "Why would you give it away? It's clearly valuable." "Not to me." Her voice was quiet but firm. She leaned in slightly, her lined face inches from mine. "It's yours now." It was never truly mine. A chill crept up my spine at the way she said it, like she was confessing something she couldn't fully explain. For a moment, I wanted to turn and leave, to shake off the strange tension in the air. But then I looked back at the mirror. The carvings caught the sunlight, their patterns almost shimmering. Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. "All right. Thank you." The woman's face relaxed into a small, enigmatic smile. She stepped aside, letting me pick up the mirror. It was heavier than I expected, but the wood felt smooth and cool against my hands. "Good luck, dear," she said as I walked away. I turned back to ask what she meant, but she had already moved to the other side of the stall, her attention fixed on rearranging a set of mismatched candlesticks. The rest of my day at the market passed in a haze. I carried the mirror carefully, trying not to think too much about the odd exchange. When I finally got home to my small apartment, I set it down in the corner of my bedroom, leaning it against the wall. As I stood back to admire it, the unease from earlier began to fade. It looked perfect there, its dark wood contrasting beautifully with my pale walls. Not bad for a freebie, I muttered to myself. I ran a hand over the carvings again, marveling at their detail. It was strange. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were almost alive, like they shifted slightly under my fingertips. I brushed the thought away, blaming it on my overactive imagination. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to fall asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the mirror. The way the woman had spoken, her insistence that it was mine, echoed in my mind. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off. But even in sleep, the mirror lingered. I dreamed of its carvings rippling like water, of shadows shifting behind its glass. And somewhere in the dream, I heard the woman's voice, faint but clear. "It's yours now." The mirror settled into my life as if it had always been there. At first, I barely noticed it leaning against the wall in my bedroom. Its ornate carvings gave the room a touch of elegance, and I found myself occasionally admiring it in passing. For a while, it was nothing more than a pretty object in a small, cluttered apartment. Then things started to change. It began subtly. So subtly I might have dismissed it entirely if I weren't such a creature of habit. Little things went wrong, things that could have easily been chalked up to coincidence or bad luck. The first crack in my sense of normalcy came during my midterm exams. I'd spent weeks preparing for my statistics test, poring over formulas and practice problems until I could recite them in my sleep. I wasn't just ready, I was confident, which was a rarity for me. But when I sat down in the exam room, something felt off. My mind, usually sharp under pressure, felt muddled and sluggish. The formulas I'd memorized with painstaking care refused to surface, as if a heavy fog had rolled into my brain. I stared at the questions, willing the answers to come, but nothing clicked. When I got my grade back, a dismal 42, I felt a knot of disbelief tighten in my stomach. I wasn't the type to fail. Not like this. "You probably just overstudied," my boyfriend Ryan said when I told him about it. He tried to sound reassuring, but I could hear the undercurrent of dismissal in his voice. "Stress can mess with your head, you know?" I nodded, trying to agree, but his words didn't sit right. The failure lingered, gnawing at the edges of my confidence. The next blow came 2 weeks later, when Ryan came over to talk. "It's not you, it's me," he began, the classic line already raising my defenses. "Seriously?" I said, staring at him across my tiny living room. "That's all you've got?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know what else to say, Clara. I've been feeling disconnected lately, like we're not on the same page anymore. We've been together for 3 years, Ryan. You're just figuring this out now." He avoided my gaze, his shoulders slumping in a way that made him look almost apologetic. "Almost. I don't want to drag this out. I think it's better if we end things now." The conversation ended with a slammed door and the echo of his footsteps fading down the hall. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank space where he'd been. The apartment felt emptier than ever, the silence pressing in from all sides. My eyes drifted to the mirror in the corner of my bedroom, its polished surface catching the dim light. It seemed to watch me, reflecting my sadness back in cruel clarity. I told myself it was just a bad month. Everyone has them. But when Theo, my cat, got sick, I couldn't ignore the growing sense that something was wrong. Theo was my constant companion, a fluffy orange tabby who followed me from room to room. He had always been healthy, bounding around with an energy that belied his 8 years. But now he was lethargic, barely moving from his spot on the windowsill. His appetite disappeared, replaced by a quiet, mournful meow that broke my heart. I took him to the vet, hoping for a simple answer, something treatable like a mild infection. But after running a battery of tests, the vet looked at me with a somber expression. "I'm sorry," she said. "We found advanced kidney failure. At his age, there's not much we can do." Her words blurred in my ears as I tried to process them. Theo's decline was rapid, and within a week, I had to make the unbearable decision to put him to sleep. I came home that day feeling hollow, clutching a tuft of his fur in a small keepsake box the vet had given me. The apartment felt wrong without him. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I caught sight of the mirror again. Something about it made me feel uneasy, like it was waiting for me to notice it. I sat up, the room bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights outside. My reflection stared back at me, perfectly still. But as I moved to rub my eyes, I froze. My reflection didn't move. For a fraction of a second, so brief I thought I'd imagined it. It stayed perfectly still, watching me. Then it moved, catching up to my real movements with a faint delay. My breath hitched. "It's nothing," I muttered aloud, forcing myself to look away. I blamed it on exhaustion, on grief, on anything but the truth scratching at the back of my mind. Over the next few days, I began noticing other strange things. My reflection would linger, holding my gaze a beat too long. Sometimes it seemed to smirk, a subtle curl of the lips that I knew I wasn't making. One morning, I caught myself examining my face in the mirror. I looked older. Fine lines I didn't remember having etched the corners of my eyes, and my skin seemed duller, less vibrant. I tried to convince myself it was stress, the weight of everything I'd been through. But the changes felt unnatural, like they'd happened too quickly. The mirror seemed to magnify my flaws, drawing attention to every imperfection. I found myself avoiding it, throwing a sheet over it when I couldn't stand the sight anymore. But even hidden beneath the fabric, I felt its presence. It lingered in the edges of my mind, a constant, oppressive weight. And the worst part? I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. The night it happened, I was beyond exhausted. It had been a week since Theo's death, and the oppressive weight of silence in the apartment was unbearable. The emptiness was a constant reminder of how quickly things had unraveled. My exam failure, Ryan's departure, Theo's sudden decline, it all sat heavily on my chest, making it hard to breathe. That evening, I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the small medicine cabinet mirror. My face looked drawn and pale, the dark circles under my eyes more pronounced than ever. I splashed cold water onto my face, letting it drip down my neck and soak into my shirt. The shock of it helped ground me, if only for a moment. When I glanced up again, I froze. My reflection wasn't moving. The realization came like a punch to the stomach. My heart hammered in my chest as I stared at the mirror, unblinking. My hands were still gripping the edge of the sink, but the reflection's hands were relaxed, hanging at its sides. My breath came in shallow, uneven gasps as I waited for it to move. For a moment, I wondered if I was hallucinating, if the sleepless nights and constant stress were finally taking their toll. But then, slowly, the reflection tilted its head, its lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. I stumbled backward, my hip bumping against the doorframe. The reflection didn't mimic the movement. It stayed rooted to the spot, its head cocked at an angle that seemed almost curious. I fled the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. For the rest of the night, I avoided looking at any reflective surfaces. I didn't dare peek at the mirror in the bedroom, not even as I climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment in my mind over and over again. The next morning, I told myself it had been a trick of the light, or maybe my imagination. But deep down, I didn't believe that. Over the next few days, the mirror's presence became impossible to ignore. It was no longer content to stay still, to play by the rules of reflection. Sometimes I would catch it watching me, its eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place, mockery, perhaps, or malice. Other times, it would mimic expressions I knew I hadn't made. Once, while brushing my hair, I saw it smile, a wide, toothy grin that stretched too far across its face. The grin vanished as soon as I noticed it, replaced by a neutral expression that almost seemed to taunt me. My anxiety grew with each passing day. I began covering the mirror more frequently, draping it in bed sheets or old scarves. But no matter what I did, I could still feel it there, lurking behind the fabric, waiting for me to look. The changes to my appearance became more pronounced, too. My skin looked dull and sallow, my hair brittle and lifeless. I was only 28, but I looked 10 years older. Meanwhile, my reflection, when I dared to glance at it, seemed disturbingly vibrant. Its eyes were bright, its skin smooth and glowing, its posture confident and poised. It didn't look like me anymore, not really. One night, desperate for answers, I pulled the sheet off the mirror and sat in front of it, staring into its depths. "What are you?" I whispered. My voice sounded small and hollow in the quiet room. The reflection stared back, its head tilting slightly, as if considering my question. For a moment, I thought it might answer, but it didn't. Instead, it smiled again. Not a wide, sinister grin this time, but a faint, almost pitying smile. "Stop it," I said, my voice trembling. "You're not real. You're just a reflection." The smile deepened, and then slowly it raised a hand, its right hand, toward the glass. My breath caught. I hadn't moved. My hands were clenched in my lap, frozen in place. But the reflection's hand pressed against the glass, its palm flat and fingers splayed. I stared, paralyzed by fear. The room felt colder, the air heavy and oppressive. The reflection leaned closer, its face nearly touching the surface of the glass. Its lips moved, but no sound came out. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, tears streaming down my face. The reflection didn't respond. It only stared, its expression unreadable. I bolted from the room, leaving the mirror uncovered. The next morning, I found a thin crack running down the center of the glass. It wasn't there before. I could feel it, a subtle, jagged line that seemed to pulse faintly under my fingertips. The reflection was still there, watching me through the crack. It didn't smile this time. It didn't move, but its eyes burned with something dark and hungry. When I woke up the morning after the crack appeared in the mirror, I knew I couldn't live with it anymore. It wasn't just fear. It was the crushing sense that the mirror wasn't going to stop until there was nothing left of me. My face in the bathroom mirror was unrecognizable. My cheeks were hollow, the skin around my eyes dark and sunken. The faint laugh lines I used to complain about had deepened into grooves, and my hair, once thick and shiny, hung in brittle strands. My body felt weak, as though I'd aged decades overnight. I stood there, staring at my reflection, and whispered to myself, "I have to find her. The woman who gave me the mirror. She was the key." That Saturday, I drove to the flea market, clinging to a thread of hope that the old woman would still be there. It was a gray, blustery day, the kind of weather that seemed to dampen everything, even sound. The market was bustling, just as it had been when I first visited. But as I wandered from stall to stall, a sinking feeling began to grow in my chest. The stall where I'd found the mirror was gone. I approached a man selling antique clocks and described the woman to him. Older, sharp eyes, a shawl draped around her shoulders. "She had a stall here a couple of weeks ago," I said. "She was selling a mirror." He frowned, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "I've been selling here for 10 years. Don't know anyone like that." I moved on, asking other vendors, but the answers were all the same. Either they hadn't seen her, or they acted like I was describing a ghost. Frustration clawed at me as I wandered the aisles. How could she have disappeared so completely? It was as if the stall had never existed. Back at home, I turned to the internet, scouring forums and obscure websites for anything resembling the mirror. Hours passed in a haze of clicking and scrolling until my eyes burned from the screen's glare. I found nothing concrete, just vague superstitions about cursed objects and mirrors as portals to the unknown. Then I remembered the library. The next morning, I went to the city's central branch, a towering building with endless shelves and a dimly lit basement full of archived newspapers. I told the archivist I was researching antique mirrors and old superstitions, hoping to disguise my desperation. She handed me a stack of microfilm reels, and I settled into a dark corner of the library with the reader. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I searched for anything that stood out. Strange deaths, unexplained disappearances, rumors of cursed artifacts. Hours later, my persistence paid off. A small article from 1974 caught my eye. The headline read, "Local woman claims mirror brought family's doom." I leaned closer, my heart pounding. The article described a woman named Eleanor Griffith, who swore that an antique mirror had brought tragedy into her life. After acquiring it, her husband lost his job, her daughter fell ill, and their house burned down in a freak electrical fire. Eleanor blamed the mirror, claiming she had seen her reflection moving on its own, watching her. The article ended cryptically. The whereabouts of the mirror remain unknown, though Mrs. Griffith claims she passed it on to another unsuspecting owner. I felt sick, The details mirrored my own experience too closely to dismiss. I found two more articles, one from 1951 and another from 1928, each describing similar stories of cursed mirrors. The patterns were unmistakable. Owners experienced escalating misfortunes, saw strange behavior in their reflections, and suffered rapid health declines. The last mention of the mirror was in 1986, when a man reportedly destroyed it in a fit of rage. But clearly, that hadn't been the end of it. The more I read, the worse I felt. My body ached with fatigue, and my chest felt tight, as though the air itself had turned heavier. My reflection in the library's bathroom mirror was worse than ever. My skin pale and papery, my eyes dull. The mirror wasn't just watching me. It was taking something from me. I began to fear it wasn't only my health. My thoughts felt sluggish, my memories hazy. There were gaps in my day that I couldn't explain, moments where I'd find myself standing in a room with no recollection of how I'd gotten there. It was as if the mirror was hollowing me out. I couldn't let it continue. I had to get rid of it, no matter the cost. When I returned home that evening, I avoided looking at the mirror as I packed it into a blanket. The carvings felt rough under my fingers, like they were resisting my touch. I carried it to the car, my body trembling with the effort. Every step felt heavier than the last, and by the time I reached the trunk, my vision was swimming. I didn't care where it ended up. I just wanted it gone. I drove aimlessly for hours, searching for a place to leave it. Dumping it felt too reckless. What if someone else found it? What if the cycle started again? Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a thrift store on the edge of town. The store was closed, but a donation bin sat near the back. I hesitated, the mirror balanced in my arms. It seemed to pulse with a faint warmth, like a heartbeat. For a moment, I thought I heard something, a faint whisper just on the edge of hearing. "It's yours now." My grip tightened. My body screamed at me to stop, to turn back, but I forced myself to lower the mirror into the bin. I didn't wait to see it settle. I slammed the bin shut and stumbled back to my car, tears streaming down my face. As I drove away, a strange mix of relief and dread washed over me. The mirror was gone, but somehow I knew it wasn't finished with me. For weeks after I dropped the mirror at the thrift store, I tried to convince myself it was over. My rational mind begged me to move on, to believe that leaving it behind had ended its hold on me. But the truth clung to me like a shadow. At first, I thought I was free. My complexion began to improve. The dark hollows under my eyes faded, and my skin regained some of its vitality. The dull ache in my chest lifted, and I started to feel like myself again. Then, the dreams began. Every night, I saw the mirror. Not in my apartment, but somewhere else, an unfamiliar room, propped against a wall or bathed in dim, flickering light. In the dreams, I felt a pull toward it, a nagging compulsion to reach out and touch its surface. Each time, I woke up sweating, my heart pounding as if I'd run miles. The dreams left me restless, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a mistake. Simply abandoning the mirror hadn't been enough. It wasn't just about getting rid of it. I had to make someone else take it willingly. The thought terrified me. Could I really pass this curse on to someone else? Did I have a choice? One night, unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling through online classifieds. I wasn't even sure why. I just needed something to distract me from the unease creeping up my spine. My finger hovered over the Create Listing button. Before I could stop myself, I grabbed my laptop and wrote out a description. Beautiful antique mirror with ornate carvings. Vintage charm, excellent condition. Free to a good home. Must pick up. I stared at the words, my chest tight with guilt. The mirror wasn't in my possession anymore, but I knew how these things worked. It would find its way back to me unless I completed the transaction properly. I hit post. Within an hour, I had 3 responses. The first was from a collector who gushed about the craftsmanship based on my photo. The second was a college student looking for cheap decor. The third simply said, "I'll take it. When can I come?" Reading the replies filled me with dread. Could I really do this? These people had no idea what they were walking into. I closed my laptop and shoved it aside, pacing the apartment. The thought of condemning someone else to the torment I'd endured made me sick, but the alternative, letting the mirror consume me completely, felt unbearable. I barely slept that night, torn between desperation and guilt. The next morning, I deleted the listing. I couldn't do it. No matter how much the mirror had taken from me, I couldn't bring myself to hurt someone else. But the mirror had other plans. It appeared on my doorstep that evening, wrapped in the same blanket I'd used when I left it at the thrift store. A note was taped to the top. Item not accepted. Please remove. My blood ran cold. I stared at the mirror for a long time before dragging it inside, my hands trembling. That night, as I sat with it in my living room, the whispers began again, faint and fragmented, like voices carried on the wind. Yours, not mine. Take it. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. The room felt too small, the air too thick. In a frenzy, I yanked the mirror from the wall and hauled it outside. My bare feet slapped against the pavement as I dragged it to the curb. My hands burned from gripping its edges, but I didn't care. A man walking his dog stopped to watch, his brow furrowing as he approached. "That's a beautiful mirror," he said, his tone odd. I looked up at him, my throat dry. "You can have it," I said hoarsely. "It's free." His eyes lit up. "Seriously? Are you sure?" I nodded, forcing a smile. My heart pounded in my chest as I whispered, "It's not mine anymore. Now it's yours." He hesitated for a moment before shrugging. "Well, thank you. I'll grab it on my way back." I didn't wait to see him take it. I turned and hurried back to my apartment, my legs weak beneath me. The change was almost immediate. Over the next few weeks, my life began to shift. My energy returned. My reflection looked like me again, and even the faint lines on my face softened. Ryan called out of the blue, apologizing for how things had ended between us. He didn't ask to get back together, but the conversation felt like closure. And then came the email from my professor. Apparently, there had been a mix-up with my exam grading, and my actual score was much higher than the original mark. I passed the course after all. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. One night, as I was tidying up the bathroom, I heard it, the faintest whisper, like a breath against my ear. I froze, my eyes darting to the sink. There, wedged into the corner near the faucet, was a sliver of glass. It was small, barely the size of a fingernail, but its surface gleamed unnaturally, even in the dim light. I picked it up gingerly, holding it to the light. My reflection stared back at me from the shard, its features distorted and fragmented. But then it smiled. Not my smile. Before I could react, the reflection moved, its hand reaching toward mine from within the shard. I dropped the glass, my breath hitching as it shattered against the floor. The whispers grew louder, filling the room with a cacophony of fragmented voices. I stumbled backward, the sound following me even as I fled the bathroom. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard laughter, soft, mocking, and undeniably familiar. Thanks for watching. If you like the story, click like, subscribe to the channel, and write an idea for the next story in the comments.